Well, thanks, Steve. I mean, there are some people who look at the title of this, Video Formats for Display and Recording, and think it's got to be the most boring talk anyone could ever be asked to give. But actually, I don't think it is. I think it's fun. There are a lot of fun toys you can use to record your images and process them and share them with your buddies in the Department of Surgery and show off at Grand Rounds. And we're going to be talking about a bunch of different formats here. There's going to be some overlap with what Dr. Reardon talked about, but I recently took a course in teaching at the Wharton School, and they said one of the best keys to learning something is to repeat it. One of the best keys to learning something is to repeat it. Sorry.
I got that.
Yeah. There are only two kinds of people who get my jokes. Never mind. Anyway, one of the things that it's very easy to get confused about is all this talk about different formats and different connectors and digital this and component that. There are only two different kinds of video signals that we're going to be talking about. One is the NTSC signal, and this is the traditional signal which has been around for about 50 years. NTSC is officially standing for the National Television Systems Committee, and this is a standard signal that is used in many places, but not all places around the world. It's used in the US, it's used in Canada, Japan uses it, but it's not used in much of Europe, in actually all of Europe or much of Asia, where they use different signals, PAL and CCAM. But we're not going to talk about those because in the United States, essentially, the only video signal that we've used up until a couple of years ago was this NTSC signal. If you think about the NTSC standard signal versus the digital signal, it's almost like talking about two different languages, English and French. And you can take an English language and you can write it down on paper, or you can record it on a cassette tape, or you can spray paint it on the wall. There's a lot of ways that you can record or encode the English language. But consider that the NTSC signal is a type of language used to encode signals, but there are a lot of different ways that we can store those or transmit them through cables. Now, we talked a little bit before about how this is a scan line system, meaning that the lines are scanned individually. This is a system which is now over 50 years old, so it's based on technology which is not very current. There are about 30 frames per second that you see displayed in an NTSC signal, which is the standard signal that you're seeing on this monitor here. So if you've got one of these die-hard Sony monitors, either at home or in your operating room, you are looking at an NTSC signal there. It's actually not quite 30 frames per second, it's actually 29.97, so if you have geeky friends like I do and you want to impress them, you can let them know about that. For the most part, it is 30 frames per second, and each frame is two interlaced fields. So it scans out all the odd numbered lines in 1/60th of a second, and in the next 60th of a second, it scans out all the even numbered lines. You don't need to worry about this too much unless you're going to get into advanced video editing, which will be the subject, hopefully, of next year's digital video course. Although we've been hearing a lot about these lines of resolution, a lot of this is theoretical talk. When someone says, oh, this monitor is good for 480 lines of resolution. Well, that means yes. If you connect a fancy resolution testing box to your TV, yeah, you could see 480 lines. But in practice, you're really not going to see more than 300 lines because the monitors are never tuned right and they're a little bit out of whack and the scan lines aren't perfect. So in general, when you're dealing with an analog signal, which is what all NTSC signals are, you're dealing with resolution which is never quite up to what it's supposed to be. Video engineers say that NTSC stands for something else. I'm not sure if that's actually true. But you can take this NTSC signal and encode it a number of different ways. And Dr. Reardon told us about a whole bunch of different ways that you can encode this. Composite video, well, that's nice, it's simple. S-video, still pretty simple and a much better picture. And then DV, which is digital video, which is another way to encode that NTSC signal using your DV tape. Now, ultimately, NTSC is going to completely disappear. It's just a matter of time, and everyone's going to go digital, but at this point, it's only the lucky few, like Dr. Reardon, who get to use the completely digital systems. We're going to get to use some digital systems a little bit later today in the hands-on portion of this course. But at Mount Sinai, where I'm currently working, we have only analog systems. So we have very nice, high-quality, beautiful monitors, but it's all analog, and we're working entirely with this NTSC signal. Now, we heard a little bit about the basics of how these signals work. There's a Y signal, which is luminance. In plain English, that's the black and white signal. And you could take the Y part of a video image and just display it as an Ansel Adams photograph. It's basically a black and white image. Usually, the Y signal also includes synchronization pulses. The signal needs to know when it's done scanning and when it needs to go back to the top of the picture again to start scanning again. And that's a synchronization pulse. Sometimes that's included in one of the cables, and sometimes it's a separate cable. And then the other, the C is the chrominance or the chroma, and that's the color information. Now, composite video is great because it's simple. All you need is one of these simple connectors, one of these RCA plug cables. You probably have used them, for years to connect your stereo components, and you can send a nice video signal through it. The problem is that it's very low resolution. When you see a cable like the one on the bottom that has a bunch of cables bunched together, there's a yellow one and then a red and a white one. Usually the yellow one is for composite video, and the red and the white are for your stereo audio. So in one sense, you're sending twice as much information or twice as much bandwidth for your sound as for your video, which doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. So that's, it's very simple because you just have this one simple old-fashioned cable which costs 79 cents at Radio Shack, but it just doesn't do a great job. The luminance and the chrominance are bunched together. So if you can imagine two people trying to have, or let's say two people talking on the phone at the same time to two people on the other end, you could probably understand the conversation, but there would be a lot of interference and it wouldn't be a very clean signal. But it is simple. It only needs one cable, so we can put up with the fact that it's a noisy, low-quality signal sometimes, except in the operating room. Now, if you look at the back of your TV at home, if you have a new TV, you might see something like that picture at the right, and the composite video is going to be one of those little RCA plugs at the top. The yellow is the video, and the red and the white are usually for the audio, the stereo audio connections. There's really not a whole heck of a lot of difference between RCA and BNC connectors. An RCA plug just sticks right on, and the BNC connector you have to twist onto a little notched post. And this is, in case you don't have any experience using a BNC plug, it basically looks like this. But there's no great big difference between the signal, which is communicated through an RCA plug or through a BNC plug. It's just how it locks on and whether it's watertight or not, and whether the Navy designed it or not. If you really want to take a step up in quality, and this is kind of an answer to the, how do you get a nice picture on that second monitor in your operating room, you need to go to S-Video. And S-Video is very simply separating the color and the luminance information. If you look on your monitor, it might not say S-Video, it might say Y/C, which just means luminance and chrominance. And it's a much higher way of encoding that same NTSC signal. Again, if you look at the back of your TV at home, at the very top of that picture, you're going to see the S-Video plug. And it looks complicated, but as Dr. Reardon said, it's only 4 little metal pins. 2 pins to transmit the color information and 2 pins to transmit the luminance information. And here's a close-up. This is what it's going to look like on the back of the monitor in your operating room. Again, there are a lot of little holes there, but there's only 4 electrical pins that are connecting. Now, what is component video? Well, component video is any video that's composed of 2 or more separate signals. And if you get a DVD player these days, they all have component video outputs, which means that there's more than a single composite video plug. If you think about it, S-Video is the simplest sort of component video because there are 2 components to it, the Y, or the luminance, and C, the chrominance. So S-Video is kind of the simplest form of component video, but for the most part, people don't call it that just because it would get too confusing. There's another form of video called RGB, and in the old days of computers, we would use RGB monitors where we had a red, green, and blue input. Those are used frequently in computers, but the RGB inputs that you see on the back of your display in the operating room are a little bit different. Without getting too complicated, although the cables are colored red, green, and blue for color coding, as was mentioned to make it easier to connect them, the R is red without luminance, blue is blue without luminance, and the G is actually the luminance data. So that's the black and white information. Some monitors also have a separate cable that just transmits the synchronization signal. And again, if you have a cable like this is a cable like you might use at home to connect your DVD player to the back of your TV. It's got 3 different cables. They're labeled red, green, and blue. And the one you use in the operating room is probably going to look like this, but it's going to have a 4th cable for the synchronization. Going back to the back of your TV monitor, those S-videos inputs are at the top. Those composite video inputs that we saw before are 1 notch down. And then at the very bottom, you can see the component video inputs. Again, they're labeled green, red, and blue. You have to remember that you need to hook up all 3 of those inputs or you're not going to get a good color picture. Now, component video on the back of your monitor in the operating room looks similar, but you notice they're not 3 connectors, they're 4. There's red, green, blue, and then the synchronization is a separate signal, which is color-coded black. Now, digital video. Digital video is a new format. We can use DV to record home videos. We can use it to record operating room videos. For the most part, we're using DV as a very nice digital way of recording an old-fashioned TV signal, the NTSC signal. It's a means of encoding the image digitally, and when it's digital, that means that it's all 1s and 0s, which means you can copy it, you can edit it. There's no degradation, no decay in the quality of the signal going from one step to another. DV is a compressed format, meaning that the image is mathematically compressed so that it doesn't take up quite so much space. This means that you do have a little bit of loss in the storage of the image. You might hear people calling MPEG a lossy encoding technique, which shouldn't be confused with lousy, because it's actually a pretty darn good means of storing images. But you do lose a little bit of video information when that image gets compressed. And the 2 main ways that we record this DV signal is on mini DV and on regular DV. Some of these tapes actually have little memory chips built in which allow you to do some fancy features, but probably everyone in this room is very familiar with DV because this is what we use to make our home videos. The tapes are tiny. They're about 1 centimeter thick, a couple inches on a side. They hold about 60 minutes of data. They also come in an 80-minute size. And even in the smaller tapes, which only hold 60 minutes of video, that's really 13 gigabytes of data. So you're storing a huge amount of information on these small tapes. That's just a home video quarter on the top, and underneath is just a mini DV VCR. Now, let's talk a little bit about HD TV, because ultimately we're all going to be watching HD TV at home, and we're all going to be using HD TV in the operating room. Right now, there are not a whole lot of different vendors out there offering it. Stryker does offer an HD system, and JVC offers a nice video recorder which can record HD signals on a standard mini DV tape. But right now, there are not a lot of vendors out there offering products that you can buy on the street. HD TV is a digital signal, so it's completely different from the NTSC signal that we're used to and that we've used for the past 50 years. It's 6 times as sharp as an NTSC signal. Again, it's a compressed format, and when Dr. Reardon was talking about the crowd looking funny in a football game when the camera pans by, that's a function of the compression. MPEG is great for compressing images that don't have a lot of small details in them. For like big fields, you know, for showing a football field, that's fine, it's mostly green. But for showing the crowd with a lot of small heads in a stadium, MPEG can sometimes show its defects. But for the most part, MPEG compression is very good. There are a couple different resolution standards for HD TV. One is 1080 lines, another is 720 lines. But again, we don't really talk about lines of resolution when we're talking digital. Like Dr. Schweitzberg said, we talk about, you know, X by Y, or 1920 by 1080, 1280 by 720. Like I said, the problems at this point are that there are not a lot of vendors making HD devices available. And it can be tough to record and tough to edit once you get it back into your office and you want to do some video editing on your PC. All right, so let's say that we've got a nice video signal. We either have our NTSC signal, or if we're lucky enough to work in a digital operating room, we've got our HD TV signal. How do we record it? Well, most of us use one of these things. This, again, has been around about as long as these big, bulky monitors. This is a dye sublimation printer. So they're expensive, and they kind of, you know, make you not want to save too many images during your operation because they take a long time. and it's expensive. And they always break when you least want them to. I guess that holds for most things in surgery. So most people who have the budget to do so have moved to digital image capturing. And what that allows you to do is, instead of making a solid state print, you can just store an image of, or an image file that contains all the data that was in that image. This can either be written onto a CD or a DVD or in a little flash memory card. There are too many devices to actually go through the individual ones. Some of them can be stored in network, so you can just go back to your office and access those images off of a network card, and that's the easiest way to do it. It's worth just mentioning briefly two different formats used to store still images. The best way, the highest resolution way, is to just store a bitmap. So each little pixel in an image gets stored individually. And if you see that on your computer, that's going to be called a bitmap file or a .bmp file. But the way that most of these devices work is using some type of compression, kind of the still image version of that MPEG compression that we use for video. The still image version is called JPG or JPEG, and you can see that the more compression you use, the smaller the file gets, but the more image loss you get. I've actually, I'm pushing the limits of the use of JPEGs here. I've used the Mount Sinai logo here to demonstrate the data loss that you get in a JPEG. But you can see it's a bitmap image all the way on the left, and it's very sharp and clear. But it's that's a 20 kilobyte file in size, even though it's a very small image on my computer. When you compress that using JPEG compression, you can see that the second image, the one in the middle, is only 5K, so it's 1/4 as big as the image on the left, and it's almost as good. I mean, you really have to squint and look hard to see that maybe the letters are a little bit blurred, maybe it's not quite as sharp. But if you take that to an extreme and you really turn up the compression on your JPEG files, we've compressed it now to 2K, which is just 1/10 as big as the original image. You can see that it gets so blurry that you can't even really read the letters. Again, like with MPEG encoding, looking at the football game, JPEG is great for pictures with a lot of color, but not a lot of fine detail. And sometimes fine detail, like the writing in this image here, can get obscured or blurred with JPEG compression. For the most part, you don't need to worry about this. Why? Because your equipment doesn't let you choose. It has a little button that you press when you want to store your image, and your device is only going to support one type of image storage. And it's probably going to be JPEG, and it's probably going to be tuned so that you're not going to have to worry about getting bad images like that on the right. So for the most part, you don't need to worry about this, but it's good to know about. So how do we record all this if we want to get a moving image? Well, for years, most of us just use this VHS cassette. VHS, if you care to ask, stands for Video Home System or Vertical Helical Scan, depending if you're talking to marketing people or engineers. The tape is just about a ½ inch in width. They're extremely cheap and widely available. You can get them at any Walmart. They've got about 240 lines of resolution, and that's on a good day. So that's even less than your average broken down TV monitor is going to be able to display. And if you've ever tried it, it's extremely difficult to capture this video in a computer and edit it because this is analog, and if you want to convert this into a computer, you need to use fairly complicated equipment to get your image in there. Also, you're going to lose resolution because it's analog, and if you want to convert that to digital, you're going to lose information in the transfer process. They did make an effort to improve VHS, and the improvement was called Super VHS or Super Video. It offered about 400 lines of resolution, which is almost twice as good as regular VHS, and it was nice because it was backward compatible, meaning that you could take a regular VHS tape and play it on an SVHS deck. And it used S-video connectors, and that's the reason why many people confuse S-video and SVHS. The problem is that these tapes were expensive, and because you couldn't go to your local video store and rent, Gone with the Wind on SVHS format, it never really caught on. Now, DV did catch on in a big way. DV is digital video tape recording, and there are a bunch of different formats out there. You can see the 3 different size tapes in that picture at the lower left, and the smallest tape there is mini DV, which is what we use on our home video quarters. It comes in larger sizes. DVC Pro and DV Cam are 2 different formats of digital video recording. And that VCR that you see in the lower right is actually a means of recording HD TV signals using the DV format. The one you see at the top is a DVC Pro deck, which is what we use at Mount Sinai for digital recording of our operations. But again, that's a digital recording of an analog signal. You can also skip the tape entirely and just go straight to a hard disk. You can certainly TiVo something if you happen to be at home, or you can use a professional hard disk recorder in the operating room. These are basically just a computer hard disk which are going to store a digital image of your operation directly, and they're great. They're fast, they're efficient. The problem is that they have a fixed amount of storage. So maybe you can store 10 hours of video, or maybe you can store 100 hours of video, but that's it. And once you store your 100 hours of video, you need a means of getting that video out, whether it's through a network or by downloading it onto a DVD or a CD. Another way to go is to record straight to a DVD. And now DVD recorders, although they used to be extremely expensive, are not all that expensive. You can get single-layer DVD recorders, which just record 4.7 gigabytes of information, or dual-layer, which record almost 9 gigabytes of information. Again, DVDs are using a compressed video format, which is pretty darn good, but you can sometimes notice those digital artifacts. The nice thing is that you can record directly onto the DVD, or you can transfer a tape onto the DVD, and it's great for archival purposes because you can have a whole collection of DVDs, each storing maybe 2 hours of video in your office. The problem is it can be very difficult to use a DVD recorder to attach to your computer for editing because of timecode issues, which again kind of falls more in a digital video editing course. But in general, if you want to do editing of your video, the best way is to go straight from a tape to your computer, a digital tape to your computer. Well, that's a lot of information, but what do you use today? If you're living in the real world and you probably don't yet have a completely digital integrated operating room, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with an NTSC signal, which hopefully in the next few years will get converted to an HDTV signal. You're probably going to be using S-video cables to send your video information from one box to another. You want to record onto a DV or a mini DV tape, and ultimately when you switch over to HDTV, you're going to be able to get an HDV, or a high-definition digital video recorder, to record that image. And if you do want to take those images and stick them into a PowerPoint presentation, or stick them onto your computer, or capture still images out from your video recording, you can use software like Adobe Premiere or something similar on a PC, and it's very easy to connect through a FireWire cable to a mini DV or a DV recorder. Finally, if you want to keep this for a long time and you want to put it on your shelf and save it for the next 20 years, you can always archive it, usually onto a DVD, which gives you long-term storage in a very portable format. So that finishes my talk, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you. The question is, can you convert a JPEG image back into the raw data? You can convert anything into anything. The problem is that each time you do a conversion, you lose information. The way that a CCD works, going back to Dr. Schweitzberg's talk, is that it captures red, green, and blue images, image intensities at each pixel. As soon as you go from that bitmap image to a JPEG, you've already lost some information. And anytime you transfer, you go from JPEG to a JPEG that's more compressed, or you might convert your JPEG back to bitmap and then convert your bitmap, depending. Each time you do that, you lose a little bit of information. Well, again, different systems are going to have different capacities, but in general, most systems are going to store a high resolution, either a bitmap directly, or they're going to store such a high resolution, low compression JPEG that you'll never notice the difference. And in general, most images that we look at in surgery do not have that really high frequency information. The one thing, like if you're taking a picture of a surgical mesh that has a lot of, fine information on it, you might notice some artifacts, but for the most part, it's going to be very difficult to notice. Again, the resolution that you can theoretically store on a mini DV tape, I can't tell you the number offhand. It's higher than the quality of an NTSC signal. So you're going to be able to record the full quality of that signal. Now, you're not able to record an HD signal on a standard digital video tape. So for that, you would need a special a box, and frankly, the only one that I'm aware of is the one that I showed you that JVC makes.
Dan, let me expand upon that. Mini DV is 720 by 480. So it's 720 this way, 480 this way. Regular video is 640 by 480. And if you're, depends what your playback is. If you're recording an HD signal, you have more information than that. If you're recording a standard NTSC signal on a mini DV, you have less information than that. So 720 by 480 is considered high resolution. It's the bottom end of HD. So if you can play it back on something that is that good, you can get the full power. If you're playing it back, it's something less. So record in mini DV, and sometimes you'll be able to take advantage of it, and sometimes you'll have more information than what your monitor can display.
I could answer another question, and that is that Sony makes both for the operating room a HD recorder, and anybody who likes big boy toys like me knows that Sony just released a camcorder for non-professional use, which is HD, and there is an accompanying record device that you could, in theory, use in your OR if you had a HD camera. So if you're an early adopter like me, you got all these things. Well, it's recording on tape, on a mini DV tape. I don't remember the answer to that one. Remember that the way they do it is they make a broader stripe to get all the extra data on, so it's probably going to be shorter than whatever it says on the tape. I use DV Cam in the OR because it has a broader stripe. If you're going to edit your video ever later, then what you want to capture is the most data you can, because it's going to get compressed, but maybe in a few years there'll be a better compression scheme and you can have more data and you can repurpose it later on.
I mean, to expand upon Pat's point, you want to capture on tape, because when you push it back in your computer, you can push it back as an AVI file or a full screen QuickTime file. When you do that, that's about every 10 minutes is 2 gigabytes. Now, is that a raw video image? The answer is no. That's compressed 5 times. But if you were to take that same thing and capture it as an MPEG file, it's compressed 20 times. Now, one of the things we talk about in the video editing course is what kind of signals to use as capture. A lot of these disk capture systems are fabulous in terms of ease of use, but they capture in MPEG format. MPEG is amazingly difficult to edit because not all the frames are even. There's I frames, P frames, and B frames, and they're not even. When you capture on tape and push it back out to your computer as AVI, all the frames are equal, and you can cut in between frames. And so if you really want to edit something, you want to capture it on DV tape, which is only 5 times compressed, which is really good quality, and then edit it on your PC. And then when you have a purpose for it, send it out as tape, send it out as MPEG, send it out as whatever your purpose is. So when the digital capture devices can capture AVI on disk, then we will have arrived. Now the question was CDRW versus CDR. You can capture everything on CDR because most of these capture devices will allow you to do one case, then another case, then another case. Even though it's not an RW disk, you can still record multiple times on most CDR disks. So when I use my CDR in the operating room, it's only like 72K per picture, and you have 650 megabytes. So I record 10, 15 cases on the CD, then take it over to my office and save what I want to do. So you can do everything on the cheap CDR disk when you're doing stills, but when I really want to capture a case, I'm like Pat, just like Dan, I capture it on tape so I can repurpose it later.
The difference for operations between recording on mini DV and using a DV cam is a mini DV comes in a 60-minute tape or a 90-minute tape. They get really thin when they're up to 90 minutes, and if you put it in your editing recorder and make it run back and forth to go grab the data, it puts a lot of strain on the tape. DV cam comes in 184-minute tapes. That's 3 hours, which will capture most operations. And I've learned the hard way, don't try to turn it on, record part, then turn it off because you think this part's not important, because you will forget, and then when the alien jumps out of the assist, it won't be recording.
Of course, the follow-up to that is that the difference in price between a mini DV tape that costs 60 minutes versus, we were paying about $50 a piece for our DVC Pro tapes versus about $2 or $3 a piece for our mini DV tapes. So there's no question that it's a better format, it's a more professional format, it's a sturdier tape, but it does come at a price.
And it's $40 for 3 hours worth of recording. I think that if you do the math, though, they're all very similar per hour of recording with regard to all digital formats.